Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we are in round 8 of our coverage of the 2017 U.S. Chess Championships. White's going to be played today by Fabiano Caruana. Last round did not have the best game ever, but he's going to try to fight back since he is the reigning champion. He does need to have a good last few rounds here. His opponent, playing the black pieces, 21-year-old Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, playing a really good tournament so far. He has one loss, one win, and the rest draws. But with the victory here, if he could pull out the upset, would move him up near the top of the leaderboard. Well, so we'll go ahead and get started. Fabiano starts out with pawn to e4. Pawn e6, getting into the French defense. Pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and then knight to c3. And there's kind of three different variations that black has here. He could take on e4. He could play knight to f6, or he could play what he did, and that is bishop down here to b4. And we see more French defense in this tournament than I've seen in a while. There was another game actually just today that was the French defense as well for those following along all the games. So after bishop to a b4, this is kind of pinning down the knight. The knight on c3 is protecting the square here on e4. And so white really has to make a decision on how he wants to protect this. He decides to go ahead and play pawn up to e5. And I like that if you are going to give up your knight, maybe have a double bishop pair, I like having a strong center control with your pawns to put a lot of pressure on your opponent's king side. You know, if you were to exchange on the board right here, maybe you play bishop here to try to exchange so you don't have double pawns, or a lot of times you just play knight to f3, but then after the exchange, you just don't have as good of a pawn structure to really attack on the king side of the board. So I really like the approach, just playing pawn to e5, and then after pawn to c5, then pawn a3. This is the main line for this specific variation, saying, hey, bishop, you need to make a decision right now. Decides to go and get that double pawn on the c file, as we talked about, and then queen to a5. So attacking this pawn, white is forced to defend that. Doesn't really want to play queen to d2, blocking in his dark square bishop. This can't really do anything. And then knight to e2. That just seems even worse because it's blocking your light square bishop. You really don't want to be fianchettoing your bishop to the king side that often in this opening. So bishop to d2, somewhat kind of a forced move. Queen to a4, so deciding to play pretty aggressive with his queen, moving a lot instead of developing his other pieces, attacking, controlling this d4 square, and then queen to g4. And right away I thought we'd just see knight to c or to f3. Makes a lot of sense. Simple development move, protects the square, but we do see queen to g4, which is definitely the better option. It protects this square and also attacks this pawn here on g7. And black has two options. I usually opt for pawn to g6. This does defend it, but black decided, Daniel played king to f8, giving up his ability to castle, and does not want to go and play this pawn to g6. So with that, Fabiano, for him, that's kind of the green lights. He wants to start attacking. He knows it's going to be very difficult. The knight can come here to h6. It can't come to f6 since he's controlling it. And his king, it's going to be very difficult for him to have a lot of protection with his king since he can't castle. It's going to be hard for him to get these other pieces over to protect that. So that's where he starts to get his other pieces involved into the game. Knight to f3, pawn to b6. And he could have tried something else. Maybe queen takes on c2, rook here c1, queen up e4 check. Maybe if the queen comes off the board, knight up here to g5, knight down to f5. Daniel kind of had a decision to make, and it almost seems like when he played pawn to b6, he said, I like my position. I don't want to exchange off material. Even if I can get this pawn, I really like this variation. I've studied this. He's moving fairly quickly. So at the end of the day, Fabiano says, cool, I'll go ahead and play pawn to c4. Now, Daniel doesn't have a lot of great options to take either of these pawns. If he takes his pawn here on c4, then just pawn takes on E5 if he recaptures. Queen to E4, attacking the rook, maybe knight to C6. It is being protected by the queen here, but is pinning that down. Okay, queen to C4. We do see an exchange on board. Bishop to C4, knight E7, bishop up here E3, attacking this bishop or this pawn. King castle on the king side. He's going to have a really strong endgame with the double bishop pair. I just don't think that's going to be good for black. If instead he decides to take the d-pawn, then just bishop up here to b4 check, maybe knight to e7, blocking that. Pawn takes on d5. It gets really bad here. Queen up here to d7. Knight takes on d4. Maybe the pawns take. Bishop takes on e7. It's not going to really be taking here because then just queen up here to g7. That's going to be extremely bad. Could see the queens come off the board. Castle on the queen side. Just so much pressure. He still has the double bishop pair. He now has a really good pawn here on e5 that he can start to push, get his light square bishop and start attacking these squares. So all in all, this would be extremely bad for Daniel. So he decides, instead of taking one of these pawns, to go ahead and play knight to e7. Needs to get this activated. It's not doing too much here on g8. Fabiano continues bishop to d3, getting his last bishop involved into the game so he can castle on the king side if he wants to. Now the pawn takes, a little bit safer with the knight here on e7. Pawn takes on c5. Now the pawn recaptures. Knight up here to g5. So Fabiano definitely going for the aggressive routes. Pawn to h6, and then nice little move of knight to h7. The rook is kind of forced to take there. It looks bad if you have king to g8. We already see if the king goes to e8, then queen takes on g7. That's bad. But if the king comes to g8, then just bishop to h6. You can't take this right here. So maybe he plays knight to g6, trying to break the pin there. But then the bishop can just take, maybe pawn captures, and then knight to f6 check. Has to really take it right here. But then, queen takes on g6 checkmate. If he doesn't take, okay, well then it just gets bad from here. We can see king to f7 just starts dropping material. Queen to f3 with the discovered attack coming. Maybe now the pawn takes on h6. Knight down here to e4, discovered attack. Then after knight to d6, things get pretty dangerous for white here. He has the checkmate threats here on f7. There's just no way to stop all the threats here. Queen to a5 check. Pawn to c3. It is protected by the queen here on f3. Rook to h7, the castle on the king side. And in this position, it'd be very, very difficult, for black to really do too much with this outpost here on d6. With queen just ready to pounce at any time, it would be very tough for black to hold on to this. So he decides to go ahead and take with his rook here. Bishop takes on h7. Bishop to b7, just trying to get the light square bishop involved into the game. Castle on the king side. Knight to c6. A rook here to b1. Bishop down 8 to a6 since it was being attacked. A bishop to e3. A queen up here to a5, and then a rook to d1. I really like the setup from white. If you're thinking about what Fabiano is looking to do, it's an open board state. He has double bishop pair, which is always good open board. So you can see the control that he has now that his bishops can kind of control a lot of the board. And you can see both of his rooks. They are on these open files. They're controlling a lot of the critical squares that Daniel may try to go to, and he has a very active queen with a safe king. If you look up black side of the board, you can see he has a double pawns on the c file. His bishop is on the rim over here. It's not really protecting too much. It's just kind of blocked by this pawn right here. The queen's kind of acting alone. Both the knights are playing pretty defensive, and this rook here on a1 is not controlling anything. It hasn't moved too much, and the king doesn't have too much safety. So all in all, white is looking extremely good. It's going to be very, very difficult for black to, one, get out of this without losing, and two, find any sort of way that he can have an attack to potentially win this game. He's really looking for a draw. Black decides to go ahead and gobble up material here on e5, queen back to g3, attacking the knight, and then knight or pawn to f6, protecting the knight. But then rook up here, d6, both attacking material here on e6, getting ready to bring his rook over here to d1, double barreling, put a lot of pressure on his opponent, but also making sure that it's on a dark square, so the light square bishop for black can't really attack it. So all in all, it's going to be tough for black to really stop this defense. Bishop back here to c8, really forced to play defensive here. Rook to d1, as we talked about. Knight to d5, trying to block off this, double barrel rook here. But then bishop up here to f4. This rook's not really under any threat right now, so decides to go ahead and get his dark square bishop involved into the game. A little bit more rook to b8. Yeah, you want to control a file, but not really sure that's going to be doing too much right now. Bishop takes, pawn recaptures, and then queen up to e5 says, yeah, we'll go ahead and just start gobbling up other material if possible. And now this opens up the door for him to put even more pressure on the king side since that knight is no longer there. Queen down to d2. That says, I have to do something to try to stop this because you're threatening the rook up to d8 check, and then all sort of bad stuff starts happening. Rook up to d8, even after the queen just says, I'm not going to worry about that. King to f7, bishop to g8 check, king down here to g6, queen e4, and then after queen to f3, black decides to go ahead and resign. If we were to continue, we might see queen up to f4, but then kind of the dagger move, rook to f8, and the king's forced to move, and the queen is going to fall. It's going to be a pretty easy endgame for Fabiano Caruana. So although he did lose the last game, decided to come back, play an extremely good game with white against the French defense. So congratulations to him. Daniel played a interesting variation. I think he was a little bit outclassed in this particular game, but I love the fact that he was trying something new. Always tough to play Fabiano when he does play the white pieces playing this well, but exciting game. Only about 30 or so moves, so wasn't the longest game, but definitely exciting to watch. So hopefully you guys enjoyed round 8, and come back tomorrow and we'll be looking at round number 9. Thanks for watching.